Time is something that you can never get back. And, he regretted the time when his mother passed, the time he could not get back. And once again, he is falling into a position where he is losing out, and time is going to keep going. And, it waits for no one. And it's going to be a huge regret for Harry. And I think it will cause him enormous stress and mental anguish once it is all done, because the time will be gone.
Time. That's where this story starts. Not in a courtroom, not in a legal filing, not in the carefully timed leaks that have been flowing out of the Sussex camp for weeks, dropped, one by one, into the American press like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. This starts with time, with the brutal, irreversible truth that time is running out, and with a king who has figured out something about his son that the rest of the world is only now catching up to. Because this isn't really about security. It's not about the Home Office. It's not about the legal rights of a former working royal. Strip back every layer of spin, every leaked briefing, every carefully worded statement, and what's left is something far older and far more painful than any of that. A grandfather, two small children, and a truth that King Charles has arrived at quietly, privately, with the kind of clarity that only comes to people who know their time is limited. Here's that truth. 7-year-old Archie and 5-year-old Lilibet
in America would not be about Harry desperate to see his dad, would not be about Harry wanting to introduce his children to their grandfather. That's an excuse. That's not the reason. The reason is Harry wants to remind the world, and particularly business people who are doing deals, that he is still part of this family. And so I think it's really a painful moment for the king to realize now that his son's using him.
are being kept away from a relationship that could define who they become. And the person responsible? It's not the king. It's not the Home Office. It's not William. It's their own father, a 41-year-old man who knows exactly what he's doing and keeps doing it anyway. Charles has seen it. He understands it. And that moment of understanding is what this story is truly about. What makes this so significant is that it marks a shift in what people on the outside are finally beginning to grasp. The reconciliation was never unconditional. It was always tied to terms. And the one setting those terms has never been King Charles. The New York Post briefing isn't just interesting for what it says, it's revealing for what it shows about the method. Harry wants his father to understand that without a guaranteed security arrangement locked in place, the children won't be coming. That's the message, wrapped in the language of safety and concern, but unmistakable in what it actually is: a threat. And Charles has read it, clearly, calmly, with the same composure that has defined his entire response to this situation.
I think she's part of that, because what you just laid out there makes complete sense. Why wouldn't it just would seem logical that he would bring the children under those circumstances? Okay, I mean, goodness knows they've got things that we don't even know about, right? So why can't you do that? And I think a part of that element has to do with Meghan and what she is putting, as an obstacle in front of Harry.
There's a reason this story grips people so deeply. It's not the legal technicalities, it's not the constitutional back and forth. It's something far more human: a grandfather running out of time, and two small children running out of time to know him. That image sits at the center of everything. Once you see it clearly, all the noise fades away. What those closest to Charles confirm is this: the public performance of reconciliation and the private reality of it are two completely different things. A standoff played out through newspaper columns, while a grandfather simply waits. To understand what Charles now knows, the real revelation at the heart of all this, you have to look beneath the surface of the public dispute. The headlines give you one version: security demands, press briefings, constitutional pressure applied through American media. But those who've been watching this family closely say there's another version running quietly underneath it, and it's far more telling. What sources close to the situation describe is a man, Harry, who is genuinely stuck, caught between the life he chose and the life he walked away from.
Harry is having some conversations. Something is happening that is drawing him back to, family, seeing his father before it's too late. We have to also remember that Harry had a huge regret around what happened with his mother before she passed. And I think Harry sees it happening again now with his father. And that is the urgency that he is feeling about getting back to the UK and having his children meet their grandfather. So this is also Harry trying to not repeat history.
Between a woman who controls the terms of his existence and a father who is running out of time. People who know Harry say the pull back to Charles, to the UK, to the world Archie and Lilibet are being shut out of has been growing stronger every single month. Something is shifting in him. The people around him can feel it, even as the public briefings keep saying something different. Insiders believe Meghan is the reason a quiet, private reunion, no cameras, no briefings, no conditions, just family has never happened. Because a private visit does nothing for someone whose entire operation runs on public visibility. A grandfather meeting his grandchildren behind closed doors, warmly, simply, with no audience, that's not a story. It can't be packaged, it can't be leveraged, it just is. And that, sources suggest, is exactly why it hasn't happened. There's one detail in the New York Post account worth paying close attention to.
Breaking from Meghan into really seeing what is important is what he needs to do at this point. Because you're talking about time, and that means putting aside whatever it is your wife might be telling you, whatever it is that you might want, and thinking about the time that your children are missing out with a man, and the clock is ticking. And what are you going to do when the clock stops and your father is no longer here and your children have not seen him?
Harry was reportedly still left off the guest list for his cousin Peter Philip's recent wedding. Not invited, not included. That absence, quiet, unremarked but impossible to miss, tells you where things actually stand, not where the Sussex communications machine wants you to think they stand. The family hasn't warmed, and Charles knows that better than anyone. What stands out to those who've studied the Sussex media operation closely is just how consistent the method is: the right story, to the right journalist, at exactly the right moment. A perfectly timed briefing that lands just as public interest starts to cool. Every move calculated, every leak serving a purpose. And that purpose is never the one they claim it is. The stated reason is always just the wrapper for something else entirely. Charles has watched this playbook run long enough to see straight through it, and those around him say that clarity is both admirable and quietly devastating. The whisper from those closest to the king isn't one of rage.
Harry will never be able to have his children experience anything that he experienced, Harry, when he was growing up. This I believe is very hurtful to Harry. He is starting to see now that he is missing out and his children are missing out, and that Meghan is controlling everything. And I feel, is feeling very regretful. He is looking at Meghan as someone that is controlling his life completely, despite how he feels.
It's something heavier than that. It's grief, the grief of a man who loves his son deeply, who mourns the grandfather he's been prevented from becoming, and who has been forced by someone else's choices to pick between his constitutional duty and his family. He chose duty, not because the love isn't there, but because some things cannot be traded away, even for love. And those who've been around Harry over the past year say something is genuinely cracking beneath the surface of all those public demands. A man beginning to feel the full weight of what he walked away from, not just for himself, but for his children and for his father. What Charles has shown, not through words, but through months of calm, patient, unshakable consistency, is that he sees all of it. He's clocked the pattern. He's watched how every private opening gets turned into a public demand, how every sincere gesture gets flipped into leverage. And instead of playing along, he's done something far harder and far more dignified. He's held the line, kept the door open, and waited. Because if Harry genuinely wants to bring Archie and Lilibet to meet their grandfather, the path exists. It has always existed. What's being demanded instead is a political guarantee, a constitutional security arrangement that can't be undone when the next king takes the throne. And Charles sees that for exactly what it is.
Behind it, we have to understand, Dan, that Meghan is the one behind Harry making these demands. I think she's the one making it so complicated and difficult. And Harry is just falling into doing what Meghan tells him to do. Because, he is kind of like that child that wants what he wants. So it doesn't make sense. It lets me know that Harry is just trying to be complicated.
Something else needs to be said plainly here. The security argument deserves honest scrutiny. Harry has traveled to Ukraine without the protections he's demanding for a trip to Scotland. Meghan has travelled solo to Chicago. The family visited Australia. In none of those situations did this same threshold suddenly appear, which doesn't mean the concerns are fabricated, but it does mean they're being applied selectively. And the question of why for this visit, at this moment, is one Charles has already answered for himself. This is where the parallel to Diana becomes impossible to ignore. Harry isn't the first person in this family to learn too late what it costs to leave things unresolved. Those who understand Harry's inner world, who've watched him carry the weight of losing his mother for nearly 3 decades, say the urgency driving his behavior right now isn't purely strategic. It's emotional. It's rooted in a wound that never fully closed. He knows what it means to run out of time with someone. He knows the specific agony of wishing you'd made different choices before the window shut. And those closest to him say he's starting to see the same pattern forming with his father that he saw too late with his mother. The same clock, the same narrowing window, the same gut punch of awareness arriving just a beat too late to feel okay about. Because the clock is ticking, Charles knows it. And Harry, at his most honest with himself, knows it too. Those around the king who watch him carry this with such careful restraint say it's both admirable and heartbreaking in equal measure. Admirable because it would be so easy, so completely understandable, for a man in Charles's position to simply say, "Just come. Please, bring them." Heartbreaking because he can't. Because doing that would hand Harry a blueprint for pulling the same move again and again for the rest of his life. And Charles will not give that up, even now. What Tom Bower has identified cuts through all the noise straight to the real fear underneath Harry's public maneuvering, not the security fear, not the legal one, but the existential one. The fear of permanent exile. Once you sit with that, really sit with what it would mean to be locked out of Britain entirely when William takes the throne, Harry's behaviour stops looking reckless and starts looking desperate. A man scrambling to secure a future he can feel slipping away with every passing month. And those who follow this most closely say there's only one explanation for why the quiet, private route has never been taken. One obstacle. One force operating with total consistency. And those inside the Sussex operation are no longer holding back from naming it. The question people closest to Harry keep coming back to isn't whether he wants to see his father. Those who know him say that desire is real. The question is whether he's capable of...
And what Harry fears is that once Charles passes on, he won't be let into Britain at all. And that is a major problem for him.
Going after it on terms that aren't his own, whether he can separate what he actually wants from what the brand needs, whether he can be a son before he's a product. The people who love him most say that capacity is still in there somewhere beneath all the noise. The question is whether it can surface before the window closes entirely. And those who've watched Charles navigate this say there's one detail about his response that tells you everything you need to know. He has never once briefed against Harry. Not a single counter-narrative. Not one. He has simply been silent, and in that silence, he has done something Harry, for all his talk about authenticity, hasn't managed even once. He kept a private thing private. And what about Archie and Lilibet? Because when you cut through every layer of politics, strategy, and media management, they are what this story is actually about. Not the constitutional arguments, not the security frameworks, the children. Always ultimately the children. Archie is 7, Lilibet is 5. They are at exactly the age when childhood starts carving itself into memory, when the relationships you're given, or denied, begin laying the foundation for the adults you'll become. George is 12, Charlotte is 11, Louis is 8. Those 3 children know their grandfather. They know Balmoral in the summer, the easy warmth of family gathered without conditions or agendas. Archie and Lilibet know Montecito, and not very much that is simply, naturally, unconditionally theirs. The revelation Charles has arrived at is that the damage being done here is not abstract. It's 2 small children growing up without things that should have been theirs from the start. Not titles, not palaces, just a grandfather who loves them, cousins who could have been their closest friends. A country that is half of who they are. And every week that passes without those things is a week that cannot be given back. Childhood does not wait while the adults around it sort out their grievances. It's worth stopping to think about what Archie and Lilibet's future actually looks like if this trajectory holds. George, Charlotte, and Louis are building a childhood with deep roots in a family, in a history, in a sense of belonging that will be part of them for the rest of their lives. Archie and Lilibet are building something different. Something more rootless, more managed, more constructed. And the question the one people who genuinely care about these children are asking is what happens when they're old enough to ask their own questions? When they want to know why they grew up so far from all of it?
Seeing your grandchildren should just be a natural thing. There should not be any negotiations around seeing your grandchildren. You know, Harry will always keep wanting more and more if his father gives. Now, I have heard that a decision has been made. We just don't know what it is, right? So they are definitely going to, I think, I don't know, announce something maybe soon, but Harry's in a position now where he's just trying to force his father's hand.
That day is coming, and the answers will say everything about the choices being made right now. Those closest to this situation have said something that needs to be heard clearly. Harry spent years telling the world about the pain of his own childhood, about the gaps where support should have been, the missing warmth, the closed doors, and yet the man who built an entire public identity around that story is now responsible for those same gaps in his own children's lives. The same absences, the same missing relationships, the same closed doors, not because anyone on the other side locked them, but because he won't open them without conditions attached. That is a choice. What Charles has come to understand about these children, the quiet, personal understanding sitting at the core of all this, is that their window is different from Harry's window. For the children, it's about memory. About the early years when a grandfather becomes a fixed point in a child's understanding of who they are and where they come from. George, Charlotte, and Louis have that fixed point. For Archie and Lilibet, it's not being built at all. And every year that passes makes it harder to build. Charles knows this. He thinks about it. Those around him say he thinks about it far more than he ever shows. And then there's what Tom Bower identified, cutting straight through all the noise to the real fear driving Harry's public maneuvering. The existential fear. The one Charles has come to understand is the true engine behind everything. Once you sit with what it would actually mean for Harry to be locked out of Britain entirely when William takes the throne, his behavior stops looking reckless and starts looking like exactly what it is. Desperation. The behavior of a man who feels the window closing and is throwing everything at it, including his own children, hoping something shifts. That is the reality in which Charles has made his decision. A settled, clear-eyed decision that those around the king confirm is now final. Not born from indifference to his son. Not made in anger.
When I think of all of the stories of Harry talking about, the childhood pain and suffering that he endured, his family never did anything to him like what he's done to his own children.
Made by a king who knows precisely what is being asked of him and has chosen, with complete clarity, not to give it. What Charles's revelation actually means, the truth at the core of all this, isn't a speech or a statement, it's a decision. A decision that says, I will not be leveraged through my own grandchildren. I will not trigger a constitutional crisis over a visit that could happen privately tomorrow, if my son simply chose to make it so. But the door is open. It has always been open. And the truth that decision exposes, the thing that has left people who love this family genuinely stunned, is that the ball is entirely in Harry's court. It always has been. Charles hasn't blocked a visit. The government hasn't blocked a visit. William hasn't blocked a visit. The only thing standing between Archie and Lilibet and their grandfather is the set of conditions attached by the very people who claim loudest to want it. That gap between the stated desire and the chosen method is exactly what Charles has now seen in full clarity. What strikes those who followed this story from the beginning is the extraordinary patience Charles has shown. He has absorbed things that would have broken most people. He's watched private family moments get turned into commercial content. He's seen intimate conversations repackaged and sold. He's read interviews where his own words were twisted into something unrecognizable. And through every single one of those moments, his position has never moved. The door is open. Come home. Bring the children. Privately. Without conditions. No cameras. No briefings. No leverage. Just family. And what's particularly striking is that Charles's revelation hasn't come from anything Harry or Meghan have said. It's come from the shape of what they haven't done. The private visits that never happened. The quiet phone calls that were never made without a documentary crew somewhere nearby. The Balmoral summers that came and went without Archie and Lilibet ever sitting in those rooms, running across those grounds, breathing that is as much a part of who the Windsors are as anything written in any constitutional document. Every absence is a data point. And the picture those data points paint is not one of two people who want reconciliation and are being blocked. It's the picture of two people who want reconciliation strictly on their own terms, a guaranteed constitutional framework, a permanent security arrangement, a public acknowledgement that cannot be walked back and will accept nothing less, nothing quieter.
Seeing your grandchildren should just be a natural thing. There should not be any negotiations around seeing your grandchildren. How absurd is that? And at the end of all of this, Dan, Harry is going to regret it so much because you do not use your children as pawns to get what you want. Make it about your children seeing their grandfather. Make it about them having the experience of knowing your father, the king, before, he passes on. That's what it should be about.
Nothing simpler. Nothing that doesn't come with the weight of official recognition attached. That observation, simple, devastating, impossible to argue with, is the one that stays with you long after everything else fades. Because it reframes the entire narrative. It takes the story Harry has been telling the world of a family that shut him out, of a system that failed him, of a father who chose the institution over his son, and it asks a single uncomfortable question. If the door is open, why hasn't he walked through it? And those closest to this situation have been circling that question for months. Not the constitutional question, not the security question, the deeply, uncomfortably human one. Because there is something almost unbearable about watching a grandfather wait and wait and wait while the man holding the key gives interview after interview about how much he misses his family. What Charles has come to understand, and this is the part that those around him say has shifted something fundamental in how he carries all of this, is that he cannot want this for Harry more than Harry wants it for himself. That realization, quiet as it is, changes everything. It lifts a weight. It closes a certain kind of door inside a person, even as the actual door remains wide open. You cannot pull someone toward a relationship they are not ready to choose without conditions. You cannot love someone into a decision they have not yet made for themselves. He cannot reach across the Atlantic through longing alone. All he can do is hold his position, keep the door open, and wait for the day Harry decides that his children's relationship with their grandfather matters more than the framework surrounding that relationship. More than the guarantee, more than the constitutional protection, more than the brand moment it could become if only it were handled differently. And in that waiting, the patient, dignified, quietly heartbroken waiting of a grandfather who would give almost anything for a private afternoon with two grandchildren he barely knows. There is something that functions like a confession, unspoken but written clearly in the very shape of his restraint. In every public appearance where he says nothing, in every briefing that never comes from his side, in every counter-narrative he has chosen, again and again, not to launch. I love those children. I want to know them. I cannot make it happen alone. And the person who holds every key to every door is choosing for now not to use any of them. That is the truth sitting at the center of this. And it is a truth.
Harry's children will completely be isolated with no real tight bond to that royal image that has made Harry who he is, who he still is today. Seeing Charlotte and George and all the cousins getting together and learning things about each other, having those childhood memories together. And his children will have who? Nobody.
That grows heavier with every passing season. Now let's talk about what this actually looks like from the outside, because the public dimension of this situation is not separate from the private one. It is deeply, uncomfortably connected to it. Every time a story drops in an American newspaper about Harry's security demands, every time a source close to the Sussex camp gives a carefully worded quote about how much the children miss their grandfather, every time the narrative shifts just slightly to reposition Harry as the wounded party reaching out, Charles watches it, he reads it, and those around him say he understands it with a precision that would surprise people who have underestimated him. Because Charles has been navigating institutions, managing narratives, and reading power dynamics for longer than most of the people currently briefing against him have been alive. He was not born yesterday. He was not built for this fight yesterday. He has been in training for this kind of patience, this kind of endurance, his entire life. And the composure he is showing now is not the composure of a man who doesn't understand what is happening. It is the composure of a man who understands it completely and has chosen deliberately not to play the game being offered to him. That choice is radical. In a media environment where silence gets interpreted as weakness, where not responding is seen as losing, Charles has held to something older and more powerful than any news cycle. He has held to the simple, devastating truth that some things do not need to be argued because they are already visible to anyone paying honest attention. And people are paying attention. The shift in public sentiment around Harry and Meghan over the past 2 years has been remarkable, not because of anything Charles has said, but because the pattern has become impossible to ignore. The book, the documentary, the interviews, the legal cases, the security demands, each one arriving at a moment of maximum impact, each one extracting something from the family while simultaneously claiming to want nothing more than peace. People have noticed, they have done the math. And the answer they keep arriving at is the same one Charles arrived at quietly, privately, long before any of them. Let's talk about Meghan specifically, because her role in all of this is something those closest to the situation are now willing to discuss more openly than they once were. And it's important to be clear here, this is not about casting her as a villain in a fairy tale. Reality is almost always more complicated than that, and the people who know her best say she is more complicated than the role she has been assigned in the easy version of this story. But what those same people say, and they say it consistently, is that the Sussex operation as it currently exists serves her interests in ways it does not serve Harry's. A permanent, public, unresolved conflict with the royal family keeps the story alive. It keeps the relevance alive. It keeps the commercial value of the Sussex brand alive in a way that a quiet, private reconciliation simply could not. A grandfather meeting his grandchildren in secret, warmly, behind closed doors, that is not content. It cannot be packaged. It cannot be leveraged into a Netflix deal or a podcast episode or a book chapter. It simply is. And in the world the Sussex operation has built, things that simply have very little value. That is not a comfortable thing to say. But it is what sources close to the situation are saying. And it is what the pattern of behavior, examined honestly and without the filter of either camp's preferred narrative, consistently points toward. Now consider Harry himself, because he is not a passive figure in this. He is a grown man, a father, and the people who know him best say that somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the briefings and the legal maneuvering and the carefully constructed public image of a man fighting for his family's safety, there is someone who knows, who has always known, that the private route was available, that the conditions he has attached to a visit are conditions he himself would recognize, in a quiet moment, as something other than pure safety concerns. Those who have watched Harry most closely over the past few years describe a man in genuine conflict, not a calculating operator, not someone who has coldly decided to use his children as leverage, but someone who is caught genuinely, painfully caught between a life he chose and a life he left, between a woman he loves and a father he is running out of time to repair things with, between a brand that needs conflict to survive and a heart that is growing tired of the fight. That conflict is real, and those who love Harry say it shows. It shows in the moments between the public statements, in the way he talks about his father when he isn't performing for an audience, in the homesickness that those around him say has become impossible to ignore. Something is shifting in him. The people closest to him feel it even when the official position says otherwise. And that shift is perhaps the most significant development in this entire situation, more significant than any legal filing, any newspaper briefing, any constitutional argument. Because if Harry is beginning to feel the full weight of what he has walked away from, not just for himself, but for Archie, for Lilibet, for the grandfather who waits, then the entire dynamic of this standoff changes. Not overnight, not dramatically, but it changes. The clock, though, does not pause for internal shifts. It does not wait for someone to finish working through their conflict. It moves at exactly the same pace, regardless of what anyone is feeling, and Charles knows this better than anyone. He is a man who has watched time take things from him that could not be recovered. He is a man who understands, in a way that is not abstract, what it means to run out of it. And so he waits, not passively, not hopelessly, but with the specific kind of patience that comes from having made a clear decision and having no intention of walking it back. The decision is made, the position is set, the door is open, and the rest is in Harry's hands, every single piece of it. What the people who know Charles best say about him in this moment is not what you might expect. They do not describe a man consumed by grief, though the grief is there. They do not describe a man hardened by betrayal. though the betrayal has been real and public and documented in extraordinary detail. They describe a man who has found a way somehow, against considerable odds, to carry all of this alongside everything else he carries: the illness, the duties, the weight of an institution that has been navigating crises for centuries, the loss of a marriage, a mother, a friend, and now a son at a distance, 2 grandchildren he barely knows, a situation with no clean resolution in sight. He carries it the way he carries everything, without display, without complaint, without the kind of public unburdening that has become so common in this era of radical personal transparency. He carries it privately, which in the current media environment is almost a revolutionary act. And in that privacy, in that restraint, in that absolute refusal to perform his own pain for an audience, he has said more about who he is than any interview could ever capture. There is something worth sitting with in the contrast between the 2 men at the center of this story. One has spoken publicly about his pain in extraordinary detail: books, documentaries, interviews, legal statements, all of it laid out for the world to examine, to consume, to respond to. The other has said almost nothing, has let the silence speak. And the silence, it turns out, is considerably louder than anyone expected it to be. Because what the silence communicates to those paying attention, to those who have watched this unfold in real time, is a dignity that cannot be manufactured. It cannot be briefed into existence. It cannot be packaged or positioned or released at a strategically optimal moment. It simply is. And the contrast between that silence and the relentless noise coming from the other side of the Atlantic has become one of the defining features of this entire story. So here is where things stand. Charles has made his decision. It is final and it is clear. The door is open, the conditions are absent, and the waiting continues. Harry is caught between forces pulling in opposite directions, and those who love him say the pull toward home, toward his father, toward the country that made him, toward the grandfather his children are being denied, is growing stronger with every season that passes. The children are growing, the window is narrowing, and the clock moves at exactly the same pace for everyone involved, without exception, without mercy, without pause. The question I want to leave you with, because it is the one I keep returning to, the one that stays with me long after the constitutional arguments and the security frameworks and the newspaper briefings have faded, is a simple one. If Harry genuinely, truly, without conditions or agenda or brand calculation attached, wanted Archie and Lilibet to know their grandfather, what would tomorrow look like? What would he do differently? What call would he make? What condition would he drop? What door would he simply walk through without demanding it be redesigned first? The answer is not complicated. It has never been complicated. And the fact that it remains unanswered, that is the story. That is the whole story. Everything else is noise. If this gave you something real to think about, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this conversation and join it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this story is nowhere near over, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think is really holding the key here? And share this with someone you think would care. Because the more people who see the full picture, the clearer this conversation becomes. We'll see you in the next one.